Good afternoon and good evening to everyone joining us from Europe or further away today. I'm Michal Friedman, the Jack Buncher Professor of Jewish Studies in the Department of History at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I would like to briefly introduce our program today. And as you well know, Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, invaded Ukraine on February 24th and launched a brutal war on Ukraine and Ukrainians. This was an unprovoked act of aggression on an independent sovereign nation. We are now in the 32nd day of the war, and Russian forces have bombed and targeted civilians, including residential buildings, hospitals, schools, and cultural centers, humanitarian corridors of people fleeing the bombings, causing the deaths of civilians, as well as the displacement of about 10 million Ukrainians, either internally or across Ukraine's national borders. Because, and as also already, many of you might already be aware that war crimes have been committed, including rapes. And Russia has also abducted and deported around 300,000 people from Ukraine. Now, because this is also a war of disinformation to a degree that it's difficult to not consider the cynical dissemination of Russian propaganda as Orwellian, it was important to me to create a program in which we get to hear the voices of Ukrainian scholars and journalists, including ones on the ground in Ukraine or have recently become displaced. We will also have a Q&A in the end, so you'll have a chance to ask questions of many participants in the program tonight, this evening or this afternoon. Finally, I would like to thank Centropa for partnering with me on this event, Dr. Kath Worfman of the School of Drama at CMU, and the Jack Buncher Foundation for their support, and especially for the support for relief efforts in Ukraine for Centropa's Ukrainian educators. I would like to now introduce my partner in organizing the event tonight, Edward Serotta. Ed Serotta is a Savannah-born, Viennese-based photographer, filmmaker, and writer who has been specializing in Jewish life in Central and Eastern Europe since the 1980s. He photographed the revolutions in Central Europe in 1989 and covered the war in Bosnia as a freelance writer and photographer. Between 1991 and 1996, he published a trilogy of books on Jews in Central Europe. Between 1996 and 1999, he produced 2 horror films for ABC News Nightline. Since 2000, he has been the director of Centropa, the Jewish Historical Institute that spent a decade interviewing 1,200 elderly Jews in 15 European countries. Centropa did not use video in its interviews. Instead, they digitized 25,000 old photographs and asked the respondents to share histories of the entire century. Centropa began working in education in 2005 and focuses primarily on Holocaust education in the lands where the Holocaust took place. Centropa employs 15 people in its offices in Vienna, Budapest, Hamburg, and Washington, DC. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michal. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances and had something else to talk about, but we don't. I am the director of Centropa, and we, as Michal has already said, we interviewed elderly Jews still living in Europe, and of relevance tonight is that we interviewed a total of 264 elderly Jews who are still living in Ukraine when we interviewed them between 2001 and about 2006, 2007. As Michal also said, we never used video in our interviews. We asked them to show us family pictures and tell us stories about their lives through their pictures. So in Ukraine alone, we have a total of 2,994 digitized family pictures, and each one comes with a story. Our goal was to ask Jews in Central and Eastern Europe to tell us about the entire century, just as they lived it. And in a country, well, I wouldn't say there's a country like Ukraine, the uniqueness of Ukraine and what people went through is something. From growing up from coming from grandparents who are usually very religious to parents who were not, to having then served in the Soviet army or fleeing to an evacuation out to Kazakhstan and places like that, coming back to find anti-Semitism in the anti-cosmopolitan campaigns of 1948 and then the Doctor's Plot of 1953. It was not easy being a Jew in anywhere in the Soviet Union, and in Ukraine, of course, you put into that in 1932-33, the fact that something like 4 million people starved to death in the enforced famine, the Holodomor, that was directed from Stalin and from the Central Committee in Moscow. We started working in education in Ukraine only in 2015. It was the last country that we worked in, started up in. And I owe everything to my colleague in Hamburg, Fabian Rula, and his team that have done all this work, because working with about €500,000 worth of grants from the German Foreign Office, they were able to set up seminars with teachers. And that's how we ended up with over 223 Ukrainian teachers from all over the country who came to our weekend seminars because they wanted to learn about Jewish history. They wanted to learn and discuss how to teach Holocaust. And Fabian's idea was bring in classroom teachers from Germany and from Poland and from other countries, and the United States even, when the US Embassy would help us out in Kyiv, and let the teachers create networks together and show each other how they were teaching very difficult subjects. We held a total of 9 seminars, 400 and something teachers wanted to come. We were able to house and take in 223 teachers. And those 223 teachers we've now been in contact with through one of our teachers, a coordinator who lives in Ukraine. He has fled from Kyiv. He's now living in the west of the country, he and his wife and child. But they are staying in touch. And as of now, we have sent monthly payments to 180 teachers, 30 of whom we've doubled that payment because they live in what we call hot zones. So that brings you up to date at least a bit on what we're doing. Centropa also is working very closely with the Babyn Yar Memorial, which is a few years ago. These are people who have now have the funding to create a series of museums and educational programs throughout not just Babyn Yar itself, the massive ravine where 33,000, almost 34,000 Jews were shot in 2 days on the 29th and 30th of September, 1941. But now we're working with them on educational programs throughout the country. We were to be joined tonight by Ruslan Kavatsiuk, but he is on a humanitarian aid mission tonight, rushing over the border, he said, to an EU country, and then he's planning to talk to us, and maybe he'll be able to join us. In the meantime, though—
Ed, I'm here. That's okay. I'm here.
Ruslan, you are here. So, and then it's good to see you, Ruslan. Where are you?
I've actually crossed the border, and I'm right now on a way to collect certain things that we need to deliver to Ukraine on Wednesday and Thursday.
Right. So Ruslan Kavatsiuk is the Deputy Director General, do I have the title right, of the Babyn Yar Memorial, and is Centropa's partner. And it's up to Ruslan to coordinate between the various scholarly groups, international scholarly groups that are advising on Babyn Yar and the memorial. So a couple of questions for you, Ruslan, and again, thanks for joining us. What can you tell us about what the goals are for the Babyn Yar Memorial Museum and what you're planning to do?
Well, our initial plan approved, and that with the supervisory board and with ministries and government agencies of Ukraine, is that we want to create a rather big complex of museums and artistic installations that would all tell the story of Babyn Yar, tell the story of Holocaust by bullets in Eastern Europe, and also create an emotional journey for the visitors of the location. And the means of that would be not only historic, accurate facts, but also an artistic language and technology that we would use to be successful in speaking with new generations, because we understand that by the time we finish creating the memorial, most, if not all, the survivors, their generation is leaving us, and it's important to tell that story so that it's not something abstract, but it's a very human, something that talks to not only mind but also to the hearts of our visitors. And at the moment, of course, the story of Babyn Yar is again changing. It was one of the locations that was attacked by missile rockets by Russian Federation forces. And only yesterday, there was another Holocaust site hit with shelling, the menorah in Kharkiv, in Drobetsky Yar. It's another ravine, again, in Kharkiv. It's the second biggest city after Kyiv in Ukraine. And it's a well-known Holocaust location, and it seems that it was damaged by the shelling. And now we understand that the story of Babyn Yar is again changing, because it was hit into the building of a former Soviet sports center avant-garde. It was one of the buildings that we planned to use for the future Holocaust in Eastern Europe museum complex. And now we understand that most probably we will have to find a way to preserve it the way it was after the shelling, like we did with the football gates that stayed near the mirror field. If you visited, you would notice a big field as a disc, a metal disc shot through by bullets with 10 columns. That 24/7 you would hear their sounds of the names of the victims, with women names by women's voices, men's names by recorded by men's voices, and children's names recorded by child voices. And you would hear 28,500 names that we have already discovered of the victims shot in Babyn Yar. And then again, right next to it, you would see old, rusty football gates on both sides that we did not take out, because it's also part of the history of how Soviet Union tried to erase the memory of the place, erase the memory about the Jews that were killed there, trying to hide it, trying to hide the ravine, create a park there, create a sport complex so that nobody would remember what happened there. And it was actually a very successful effort by Soviet Union, because until a couple of years ago, when we actively started changing this location, many people didn't know what the significance of the place, that it's a single biggest mass shooting of the Second World War that happened there. That it's not just an ordinary place of many, as people would you would hear them say. They would say many people were shot during the war, in many places. Why would you consider this place special? They did not know that this was the biggest mass grave of the Second World War, and it was in Kyiv. It was in Babyn Yar. Now more people know it, because we've built a number of installations and artistic objects and spiritual buildings. And this year we were planning to open their first museum space that would be in the shape of a hill, with the 3D model, 80 meters long 3D model of the ravine, with all the scenes of what was happening 80 years ago there, recreated. And now it's being frozen. The building is not being built because of the war, because of the Russian attack.
Ruslan, it's, at least many of us are impressed with how your team is creating all sorts of ways to tell the story of Babyn Yar and the Holocaust in Ukraine and and throughout the entire region. I'd like to shift the conversation, though, to asking about what you and the team at Babyn Yar are doing right now in Kyiv and other places in regards, because on your website, there's now a site for the work that you're doing for humanitarian aid. Can you tell us about that, what you're doing?
Sure. Well, basically what we do is that we try to change the focus a little bit. We try to change the focus of what was planned by the team. We try to shift the focus of the team to humanitarian issues. We try to help the righteous among the nations, to survivors, Holocaust survivors, so that they would all receive either help from us, or we try to evacuate some of them if they are open to it, as well as their families. And we're trying to find a way to also continue our historic research on the one hand, but on the other, we work with different institutions to help preserve some cultural and historic important artifacts, as well as the archive and the collection of the memorial. We had to evacuate it all, and we basically now, as I said, have evacuated most of our team, and that altogether is the effort that we're doing to save the institution itself and to keep it through this difficult time. And we hope that as Ukrainian armed forces will win this war, we will continue the work and creation of the memorial.
Ruslan, thanks very much. And if you can stay with us, there may be some questions at the end. And I want to thank you again, and we want you to stay safe. And you're going back into Kyiv day after tomorrow. So best of luck to you. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ed.
I'd now like to speak with our next guest, Tim Judah, who is a journalist and author. And Tim right now is sitting in his hotel room in Kharkiv in Ukraine. Tim is the author of 3 books, all on the Balkans. And Tim began his journalistic career, at least that I knew of, back when he lived in Bucharest, and when he was writing for the Times of London, and then started working for The Economist. He has then continues to work for The Economist, and he has covered conflicts in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and in Bosnia, and now in Ukraine. And then in 2014, this is where we plug Tim's excellent book called In Wartime, Stories from Ukraine. This is where Tim was on the ground in the Donbass area, and we highly recommend that book. What we do know is, considering all the wars that Tim has covered, if you go outside one morning and you see Tim Judah in front of your house, you probably waited too long to sell your house. And what we're doing now is, Tim, I'd like to turn attention to you in Kharkiv. How long have you been in Ukraine this trip? And if someone can unmute Tim. There you are.
Hi.
Right. Did you hear my question, Tim?
No, I didn't. So repeat your
Okay.
question. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, I just gave you a nice introduction.
Oh, great.
And I plugged the book and the last book. And the question is, how long have you been in Ukraine this trip?
Oh, I've been here for 2 months now. So I was here like a month before the beginning of the war on February the 24th. I was in Vienna. I took the night train to Lviv. I spent a week in Lviv. I spent a week in Odessa. I spent a week in Kharkiv, and then I went to Kiev. And now I'm back in Kharkiv today.
Right. And who are you filing for?
I initially came for the New York Review of Books, and then I was doing stuff for The Economist, who I do stuff for. At the moment, I'm now the New York Review of Books is. I'm not doing stuff for them, but the Financial Times has come in, so I'm doing a series of reportage pieces for the Financial Times.
And mostly for those of our people tonight, our participants who don't know, what are you? Are you doing mostly journalistic work, or are you also going after politicians?
I'm doing. I mean. I mean, for example, here in Kiev, in Kharkiv, I've been trying to get the mayor, but obviously the mayor's not very interested in speaking to the Financial Times. Maybe it's not big enough for a platform for him. I'm not sure. And then the governor too, but the governor too is very busy, so I'm not sure that he wants to speak to the Financial Times. So I mean, I'll stay an extra day to get the governor. But I mean, in general, I haven't been going. I mean, it hasn't been my brief to do that. I mean, there have been, for The Economist, there have been other people doing that. And my brief has really been to sort of be the person on the ground doing the reportage and the color. And, you know, going to places, well, like here where there's fighting, there's some fight, you know, I can hear the shelling in the background. And for example, I've been, you know, in places like Irpin, just outside Kyiv, which is a sort of key battleground. I've been doing much more of that than trying to find quotes from politicians.
Right. And tell us something. You're a journalist, you're alone. Do you have any, what is your backup? What is your support system?
Well, I mean, for example, in Kiev, I was, I've been, was sharing a car, and we have a Ukrainian documentary filmmaker colleague who's been acting as a translator and fixing for us. So we were I was sharing that with two photographers who I think at least one of whom you might know, Ron Haviv, who was you know, took some crucial and well-known pictures from the Bosnian War, and Heidi Levin, who works for the Washington Post. And here I'm just came with a Ukrainian colleague, a documentary filmmaker, to Kharkiv. So it's just me and him here.
Right. And then maybe I'll show a video right now of one of the burning. You shot a little bit of a burning building.
The burning building is a 16-story building which was destroyed about 2 weeks ago in Kyiv. Yeah, it was one of the more dramatic residential blocks that was burned. I mean, actually, the interesting thing about those blocks is those buildings that have been burned or attacked in Kyiv is actually unlike here in Kharkiv, where, you know, for sure they're just like randomly sort of firing missiles into the center of the city. I mean, they're targeting some buildings, but some things I'm sure are not targeted. But in Kyiv, you know, officials think that actually two officials actually said out of every four missiles, they think one hits its target, two fall on residential buildings by mistake, and the fourth is one which is like an intercepted Russian missile, which then kind of falls on a residential area, residential building. But, you know, it depends which places you are, because in places like Mariupol, of course, they're targeting everything. So it depends, you know, where you are.
Tim, we'll take a look at this video footage that you shot.
Okay.
And let me.
You need to put it on full screen. The two ladies that you just saw briefly, there were two old ladies. There two ladies. One of them was that was what they both came from that block, and one of them was pointing to her, pointing to, yeah, that's right. Those two, they were one of them was pointing to her flat on the 11th floor, which actually had not been on fire when it was hit, when it was not destroyed at the initial blast, and she was saying that it was on fire as she was looking at it burning. And actually, at that very moment, it's quite interesting because it makes me think, Ed, because you were talking about photos and family photos. I actually asked her, so what did you take? And she literally just had her handbag, and she just had I think she just had her handbag. And then at that very moment, there were. It looked. I suddenly thought it felt like snow coming down, but it wasn't. It was ash from the buildings, and including, of course, all her family photographs and everybody else's family photographs. Because I'd asked them about family photographs. I don't remember if I asked her specifically, but I have asked other people about family photographs. But as I say, at that moment, it was just a bit like snow, the ash of all their possessions being burnt at that very moment, coming down on my notebook as I was writing.
Tim, this is you've been there now for quite some time. I looked at some other footage that you shot of just driving through Kharkiv, which, as I remembered a few years ago, is an incredibly lively, huge university and technological city. And it looked like a complete ghost town. But also I looked, and although it looked like the stores were empty, I didn't see very much in the way of looting. Can you tell us about how people are responding to looters?
Well, I mean, what I've seen I saw this in Irpin, which is just outside of Kiev. There was 4 men that they had arrested for looting, who had, and I'm going to use the American English. I think you call it saran wrapped. They had been saran wrapped to parking signs in a supermarket car park. And they had their pants and underpants pulled down and potatoes shoved in their mouths. And the soldiers were waiting for the police to come and pick them up. So it was a, kind of a medieval way of treating looters. I mean, they weren't executed, but I suppose it would have been in medieval times, but they're waiting for the police to come pick them up. But I mean, I was talking to a friend today about that in Kharkiv, and she said, actually, there hasn't been that many, there hasn't been that much looting because looters get punished pretty severely. So she said there hadn't been much looting. But I mean, the interesting thing about you're saying about also looking quite empty is that Kharkiv is a city, well, until a month ago, of about 1.5 million. And I mean, there's no way to know for sure, but quite a few people I've spoken to think that there may only be 300,000 people in the city at the moment, that there's been such a vast exodus. I mean, if there's very few people on the streets, and there's people in shelters and basements, I suppose, but I think actually the vast majority of people have fled.
And understandably, I know that you went to the Brodsky synagogue, a Chabad synagogue in Kyiv, and you shot some video there. So we'll take a look at it, and you can tell us what's going on.
Yeah.
And let me just.
Well, this is this was just over a week ago. So it was the eve of was Shabbat, just over a week ago, and the Rabbi Azman announced that 300 people, Jews and non-Jews, were evacuating from Chernihiv, which is under attack. And I think it's impossible to get out. So those people arrived they arrived just after 9 o'clock in the evening. And then we'll see in the video, you'll see one of the synagogue guards explaining to the people who had just arrived, who are in a complete state of shock, really, because it's been really dreadful in Chernihiv. He was explaining to them, what would happen for those who wanted to go to. I think they had some buses the next day to Moldova. Some wanted to go to the west. Some people were going to stay in Kiev, and so he was explaining what would happen. And then, indeed, the next day they did continue their journeys. Are you going to show the video now?
Yeah, I'll show it right now. We'll take a look.
I think we can't see it.
Sorry.
Хорошо? Значит, те, кто остается потом, мы всех кормим, здесь в зале все едят. Я прошу учесть, что вы находитесь в святом месте. Поэтому, пожалуйста, не сорите. Упало что-то убирать. Молодые помогают старым, вне зависимости от того, от степени родства или знакомства с ними. Окей? Значит, теперь дальше. После того, как вы поедите, мы поймем, сколько у вас здесь остается, отведем вас.
And Ed, the next day there was in the basement. Well, there was a dinner, Shabbat dinner in the basement underneath the literally underneath where we were speaking, and there's about, I think, up to 30 people sleeping in the synagogue, and Rabbi Assman is sleeping in his office. But was underneath. They had the Shabbat dinner, and then the next day he held a service for those people who were there. And then when he finished the service, he dramatically kind of clenched his fists and he said, "From here we will launch our Kabbalistic missiles to shoot down their ballistic missiles."
That's good. He also said that he's, although he's originally from St. Petersburg, he said that he is now against the Amalek, the great enemy of the ancient Hebrews.
Yes, well, he's he is quite a character.
Yes. For those of you who don't know, this is the man who actually built a place called Anatevka outside of Kyiv. Tim, we're going to move on, but we'll have some questions for you, I'm sure. So I am now going to turn things over to my colleague, Michal Friedman, who's going to take us to the next part of our program.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you so much, Ruslan and Tim. I'm next going to introduce Dr. Marta Havryshko. She's an associate researcher at the Department of Contemporary History at the Kyiv Institute of Ukrainian Studies in the Ukrainian National Academy of Science in Lviv. She's Babyn Yar Interdisciplinary Studies Institute Director at the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. She also recently evacuated from Ukraine with her son and received an emergency fellowship at the Hamburg Institute for Social Research, and she's going to be joining us from Hamburg today. Her research interests primarily focus on gender, sexuality, and violence during World War II and the Holocaust, feminism, nationalism, and militarism. She published extensively about women in the Ukrainian nationalist underground movement and during the Holocaust. Currently, she's developing her book project on sexual violence during the Holocaust in Ukraine. And today, Marta will be interviewed by a very dear colleague, Dr. Natalia Aleksiun, who is a professor of modern Jewish history at Touro College, Graduate School of Jewish Studies, New York, and she's also the incoming Harry Rich Professor of Holocaust Studies at the University of Florida, Gainesville. Natalia Aleksiun will be joining us today from Warsaw, and where she currently is holding a fellowship at the Polish Institute of Advanced Studies in Warsaw. And she has also published books on most recently on the book 2021, Conscious History, Polish Jewish Historians Before the Holocaust with Levin, Library of Jewish Civilization. She also, in Warsaw in 2002, published a book on the Zionist movement in Poland between 1944 and 1950. She's the co-editor of several volumes, including Polin, Studies in Polish Jewry, Volume 29, Writing Jewish History in Eastern Europe, and with Antoni Polonsky and Brian Horowitz, and European Holocaust Studies, Places, Spaces, and Voids in the Holocaust in 2021 with Hanna Kubatova. She also serves as a co-editor of East European Jewish Affairs. And I'll just mention that Natalia, because she's in Warsaw, I know that in the last weeks, more than historical research, she's actually been helping organize provisions to bringing them to refugees coming in to the train station in Warsaw, coming in from the border, across the border from Ukraine, So thank you, Natalia, for that work as well, and welcome, Marta, Natalia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michal, and thank you, Ed, and thank you, Marta. It's an honor to be in conversation with you and be part of this event. Well, again, like Ed said, I wish we were having an interesting academic discussion. I have a pleasure of knowing Marta first from conferences, you know, from these nice, safe spaces, and where we can discuss archives, documents, and interpret them together. But we're speaking in a very different context. And indeed, I just before the event started, I got a message from one of the networks in Warsaw saying, you said you know Russian and or Ukrainian, please come to the train station. We need you Monday and Tuesday. So this is ongoing. Marta, so I will just go directly to the questions I hope you can touch on for our audience today. And one is the obvious question: this weaponization, distortion, abuse of history and Holocaust history in particular that is so prevalent in the propaganda that surrounds a war against Ukraine. If you could address this question first and talk about your reading of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Natalia, for this question, and thank you so much for having me here. It's a big honor for me to speak about Ukraine and about ongoing war in Ukraine. So let me share my screen. I prepare some slides, some pictures, in order to make it more clear for you about the question of weaponization of history during this ongoing war, ongoing Russian aggression. I should stress that the history and memory of World War II and the Holocaust play a huge role in this war, unfortunately. And this started not on 24 February with the full-scale invasion of Russia. This started actually more than 8 years ago, when the Maidan, so-called revolution of dignity, started in Ukraine. And you see on this picture very famous square Maidan with thousands of Ukrainians who protested against the government, who choose to move towards Europe and break with the Soviet past. And here you see an iconic picture when during the Maidan, some activists, destroyed the well-known monument of Lenin in Maidan. So after that, many monuments of Lenin were demolished, vandalized, or removed by local authority or by people. Some of them were not removed, but you see that people painted those monuments in different way. In this picture, you see that in Ukraine, we have a lot of monuments to Lenin after the collapse of Soviet Union. And by the 2017, more than 1,300 monuments to Lenin were destroyed in Ukrainian. And this was the part of the huge memory politics strategy after Maidan in Ukraine. And this strategy was to separate from Soviet narrative, which was the main and still is the main in Russian memory politics. So the new terminology was established. Ukraine memory agents started to talk about World War II and not about Great Patriotic War. The dates were shifted to 1939 as a beginning of war. And the Ukrainians were portrayed of victims of different aggressors, both Nazi Germany and its allies and Soviet state. But the huge part of this new memory politics was connected with the glorification of Ukrainian nationalists on the ground, which was involved during World War II in ethnic cleansing and hunting Jews, and in Holocaust and attacks on Poles and killing Poles during the World War II. And this is very, very painful history, very painful part of Ukrainian history, and we are still dealing with that. One of the main points in this new memory politics was connected to introducing the role of Ukrainians in liberation the Europe from Nazis. And many memory agents started to talk about the contribution of many Ukrainians with different backgrounds, with Jewish backgrounds who were in Red Army, with Ukrainian ethnic backgrounds. But also the most controversial part of this memory politics was connected to glorification, as I said, of leaders and members of Ukrainian nationalists on the ground. And here you see monuments to those leaders, to those members in different cities, primarily in Western Ukraine. And as you see on these graphs, we still have a division in attitude between different regions of Ukraine, because the Ukrainian nationalists and the underground movement, UPA and UN, were mostly present in Western Ukraine. So those tendencies were, the Putin and the Russian authority was not happy with these tendencies. And in his famous speech at Yad Vashem 2 years ago, Vladimir Putin actually addressed all those tendencies in Ukraine memory politics, because all those stress the existence of Russian state, and its memory politics. And during this speech, actually, Putin called the members of Ukrainian nationalist movement as fascist, and he claimed that the Russians are only one who won the war and who liberate the Europe from Nazis. So we see the obvious conflict between Russian and Ukrainian memory politics, and this struggle is still there. And we have Russia claimed that Russia now is the anti-fascist state and should struggle with all fascist tendencies. So the preparation and using of these slogans, of these discourses, was actually the preparation for the full-scale invasion to Ukraine, and the invasion of Ukraine. And the election of Volodymyr Zelensky, who, as you know, has clearly Jewish background and Jewish identity, was not a problem for Russian authorities. For example, Dmitry Medvedev claimed that he's like a collaborator, like a Jewish collaborator during the World War II and the Holocaust, like a capo who served Nazis. So the Russian propagandist machine put Zelensky in this spot. But what about ordinary Russians? Could we talk about only Putin and his inner circle, who is responsible for Holocaust distortion, for misuse of the history and memory of World War II and the Holocaust? No. Here you see the footage from the new song of well-known band Leningrad with the title No Entry. And the main point of this new song released in March during this war, after the beginning of this war, was the Russians are new Jews. And as you see, he's clearly referring to the Star of David. And just one line from this song: a Russian is now like a Jew in Berlin in 1940. And we see the rising of anti-Semitism in Russia. For example, you see that some unknown vandals put the pig's head at the Moscow apartment of Alexei Venediktov, Echo Moskvy radio station's editor-in-chief. But we have clear numbers that are against these Russian propagandas. And the Pew Research Center released this map, which shows how many adults in different countries across Europe are not willing to accept Jews as fellow citizens. And you clearly see that Ukraine have only 5% of those people. Nowadays, in contrast to the World War II, to the period of World War II and the Holocaust, many Jews who explicitly expose their Jewish identity and Jewish background are fighting alongside with ethnic Ukrainians in the armed forces of Ukraine, because Ukraine for them is their home country and they don't want Putin to take it of them. And here is now it's I believe iconic picture of Asher Cherkassky, war veteran, with his son. So I believe that this Holocaust distortion should be stressed in every discussion. Holocaust distortion by a Russian authority should be put on the table when we discuss how this cruel, unprovoked war was justified by different agents in different circles.
Thank you so much, Marta, for this. I agree, this is incredibly important. But I also wanted to follow up, and we have a limited time. I hope there will be time for our audience to ask you a little bit more in a discussion time. But I want to ask you specifically about the Holocaust. This is following also what we learned from Ruslan and the amazing work that Centropa is doing, was doing in Ukraine, which is how Ukraine, in your view, how Ukraine has dealt with that difficult past that you mentioned. Specifically for you, what was it like to carry out research on the heart of the difficult history before the war? And then a tiny follow-up question, how we as people not in Ukraine can help also in this field of scholarship research during the war.
Thank you so much, Natalia, for this very important question. I am proud to belong to this bunch of young generation of historians in Ukraine who are trying to face these difficult, inconvenient questions regarding Ukraine-Jewish relations during the World War II and the Holocaust. Me and other young scholars, Yuri Radchenko, Andrei Usach, Tanya Borodina, Yuri Kaparulin, and other people are trying to touch upon very difficult questions, upon the involvement of local Ukrainians, including members of Ukraine nationalists on the ground, in the Holocaust. For example, I had the privilege to, from the beginning of this year, to be a director of the of the Babyn Yar Interdisciplinary Studies Institute at the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. And we know that mostly NGO in Ukraine are the most vibrant centers of the Holocaust studies and the Holocaust educations nowadays in Ukraine. And we established many programs in order to bring to light different aspects of not only Babyn Yar massacre, history of Babyn Yar, but put it in the broader context of the Holocaust in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe. And we were planning so many programs actually to develop our center and to make this center as an intellectual hub for creation knowledge, for spreading this knowledge, for academic collaboration. And we are in close cooperation with different academic circuits from different countries with different backgrounds. And I'm very happy that Ukraine are taking very serious steps in order to deal with this uncomfortable truth and silenced for many years this history. And I want to stress at the end of our conversation that not all Holocaust scholars and not all educators who are dealing with the Holocaust and its lessons were so lucky as me, because Natalia actually put her efforts along with others to rescue me and my son from Ukraine, and I am so appreciated for that. But many Ukrainians, many Ukrainian scholars are still in Ukraine. They can't leave the country because of health issues, security issues. They can't leave their parents, for example, or grandparents. And some of them, especially men, we have this gender dimension here. Men couldn't leave country due to martial law. That's why I am asking international community, different institutions to provide support for them as well, in order to make, to help them to survive and support their dependents, to help them to develop their very important research. So they need non-residential scholarships, for example. They need help in accessing different journals, different books, different archives, different sources in order to foster their work. So I'm asking the entire community of educators and scholars, save Ukrainian science, help Ukrainian scholars nowadays. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marta.
Thank you so much, Natalia and Marta. That was incredibly informative and very moving. And thank you, Marta, for calling everyone's attention to the need to rescue Ukrainian science and scientists, researchers. And Marta is from Lviv, which some of you might have heard that last night it was shelled for the first time, it was bombed. So Marta, we hope that your family is okay. Now, I would now like to introduce 4 talented actors of the School of Drama at Carnegie Mellon University: Olivia DeVart, Noah Pacht, Tessa Wineland, and Lucas Yarvi. And they'll be reading for us from some of the wartime diaries of Centropa's Ukrainian educators and their students. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. My name is Olivia. I am a 3rd-year musical theater major at Carnegie Mellon University. And today I will be reading Larissa's diary entry, and she lives in the Mykolaiv region of Ukraine. February 24th, 2022. The morning of this day began with a phone call from my eldest daughter. Mom, don't worry, we're fine, but Mykolaiv is being bombed near the Kolbakino airfield. It's next to us. Danya, daughter, this is war. Collect your belongings and leave the city. In the first minutes, I could not believe that Russia had invaded Ukraine. I called the man who was working in Kyiv. By the way, he's still there because he could not leave. And I heard explosions on the phone. The youngest daughter in Odessa. Mom, is this war? How? Why? I turn on the TV. I surf the internet. I cannot believe. I do not want to believe. My Ukraine, my country, my home has been attacked. In the first minutes, despair. Then, the realization that something needs to be done. I am a teacher, a history teacher, and my civic position is to help my country as much as I can to push the enemy away. I, together with my colleagues, joined the Domanivsky Shield community, where we start raising funds, clothes, medicines, food products, and everything necessary for the soldiers of our armed forces. Almost all the residents join. They bring, they donate, they carry. All this is sorted and sent to the checkpoints and military units. But this is not enough for me. I want to do more. Some disturbing news starts arriving from Kharkiv, Mariupol. The first casualties, killed and wounded, and among them, children. Tears and anger at these monsters. Soldiers from all over Ukraine come to our school, but mostly from Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Ternopil, and other regions, and we are starting to prepare meals to lift their spirits. Every day in the morning and in the evening, we take turns. First, running online classes, then running to the school canteen to feed the Ukrainian soldiers. They thank us, but we are infinitely grateful to them for defending us against the Russian fascists. Every time we say goodbye, we give them our blessings. We hug and we ask, please stay alive and beat the enemy mercilessly for our homeland. We are so close to each warrior that we invite each other over for a visit after the victory. All days merge into one, and you only count what day of the war it is. Thus, we did not pay attention to the 8th of March, International Women's Day. What of holidays during the war? In the morning, when we came to school, we quickly made breakfast and decided on what to cook for lunch and dinner, since we want the boys to feel at home. At about 10 a.m., the commander invited all the women from the kitchen to one of the classrooms. He said we had to talk. We came, a little embarrassed, and there we had a real concert. Among our soldiers, there were those who played the piano and those who sang well. First, tears, followed by laughter. At the end of the holiday concert, all the guys lined up and congratulated us, giving us bouquets of tulips. We will be remembering this holiday for the rest of our lives. Unfortunately, even though we took photos, the military did not leave any with us for security reasons. The military changes, but we stay and continue providing them with all possible assistance, in addition to time and money, anything that could bring our victory closer. We wash their clothes, we feed them, we buy medicine, and if necessary, we give first aid. We are all united in our desire to win. Larissa S., Teacher of History, Mykolaiv region. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Noah Pocht. I am a second-year acting student at Carnegie Mellon, and I'm Jewish, and my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and I'm the descendant of a lot of Eastern Europeans, and I'm very grateful to all of you for organizing this. I think it's very important right now. So thank you. I will be reading 2 journal entries. one by a 21-year-old named Yuri, and one by a 17-year-old named Danya. Okay. Hi there. I would like to write my first letter about the war. My name is Yuri. I am 21 years old. I am a scout and a student at a religious university in Ukraine. I live and stay by the university. This is my hometown. Now, I am with the Plast Scout Volunteer Center in my city. The war has been going on for almost a month, and I have been here literally every day. Before the war, I used to work and continue working as an office manager at Plast. In the first days, there was a complete chaos. So many people, just a tsunami of adrenaline, and so much help from the caring people. During the first 10 days of the war, no one could even sit down to eat quietly. There were constantly so many calls and people to answer and attend to that it was merely impossible to even think about one's own needs. All the forces were directed at the army. Even during the air raids, we ran a call center in the basement rather than keeping it as a safe place to think. Now there's much less work. Volunteers have partially returned to their studies and work. Many of them combine those activities at our headquarters since everything has gone online again. In the basement, we can sing songs to lift our spirits and improve the mood. The structure of the work has become clearer. Everyone knows what to do and who is responsible for what. It has all turned into somewhat a routine, and I'm not particularly happy about it. My expectations of the war are quite pessimistic, and I sincerely hope that the war will be over by the end of the summer. I will send you photos and videos of my days. Peace, Yuri. Hello, my name is Danya. I'm 17 years old. Now, there is a war going on in Ukraine. It is very scary. It's scary to remember February 24th, because in the morning at 6, Mom runs up to me in tears and says, "Danya, wake up. This is war. Our airport was shelled." I quickly got up and began to collect all the necessary things. The news began to say that Kharkov was being shelled and so on. 2 days, it was more or less quiet by us. On the third day, my mother and I went to help pack medicines for the front. And then we hear a siren. Everyone in confusion began to descend into the bomb shelter. When we got home, we couldn't relax. Every 2 to 3 hours, we received messages. "Warning, the emergency alarm is on. Everyone must go to the shelter." We understood that the rest of the nights, we would sleep dressed and take turns on duty. God bless that this will all be over soon. Glory to Ukraine. Danya. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Tessa. I'm a third-year acting student at Carnegie Mellon University, and I am reading a diary from Maria, who lives in the Volyn region. 6 days ago, I was still making the usual plans for the weekend, going to the library, meeting friends. But I had no idea that my life could change so much in just one night. On February 24th, I woke up to powerful explosions in my city. But as it turned out, the trouble came not only to my village. In a few minutes, I learned that the aggressor's country was attacking the entire territory of my native state from all sides, from the sky, on earth, and even from the borders of Belarus. Now every time I hear the siren, my family and I must run to the shelter. So far, the people of my city have not suffered much damage, but it is extremely painful to read the news every free minute and learn that the occupier is destroying entire cities, shelling them, attacking not only military infrastructure but also civilians. I want to cover my ears and never again hear the terrible numbers of innocent children, women, terminally ill people, the elderly, who die every day due to shelling and explosions. Fear creeps in when friends from other cities write that they can't go outside their home and buy necessities because everyone who goes out is shot. I am extremely grateful to the armed forces, the territorial defense, and other law enforcement agencies for the fact that my home is still intact and I do not need to seek shelter. I am proud of the courage of ordinary people who unarmed detain the enemy, throwing themselves directly under their machines. I thank God for another day I lived. And I believe that in the end, the hell created by one man crippling every minute the fate of millions of citizens of my home country will end. We will definitely win. Everything will be Ukraine. And that was written on March 2nd. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Lucas Yarvi. I'm a second-year acting major at Carnegie Mellon University, and I have family from Poland and Estonia. And today I will be reading a diary entry by a person named Artem from the Mykolaiv region. February 24th was supposed to be a normal day. I had no idea how everything could be changed, how one person's plan could destroy the lives of millions of people. My mom woke me up at 5 a.m. and said that something was exploding in the city. At first, I didn't even understand what was happening. But as soon as I got out of bed and looked out the window, I immediately heard several explosions and the sounds of jet engines. From that moment, I had many questions, but as soon as I turned on the phone, one message from a friend was enough for me. The worst thought came true. Putin declared war on us. I could not believe it. I was scared. First of all, I worried about my sister, who was in another city. I was lucky that my city was far from the border and was not an important target. After the end of the shooting, my parents would buy supplies and withdraw money from the cards. My task was to pack the baggage and observe the situation through the screen on my phone. Sometime later, I saw many photos of destroyed airports and military bases, but that was just the beginning. By the end of the day, we were ready to leave the house and go somewhere. We didn't know what to do. My mother was crying, and my father was calm. The only good news is that in the morning my sister got on the bus and went abroad. The most terrible day was February 25th. Russian troops landed on our city, but our brave soldiers killed and destroyed them. In the evening, tanks drove into the city and the battle began. It was far from me, but I heard every shot. During the night, our military regrouped and repulsed the enemy. The next 10 days passed like one moment. I woke up early, had breakfast, and the air raid warning turned on. It happened 3 times a day. I had to sleep in the same clothes. On the first day, there was young guys with Molotov cocktails in the shelter. We were lucky because the shelter was large and under the house. Every day I saw more and more terrible photos, injured children, destroyed buildings. It showed that the Russian military wasn't different from the Nazis. For a long time spent in the shelter, I joined the information army and tried to explain the situation to the Russian population. Sometimes they changed their mind. After 10 days, my mother and I managed to draw up a route and plan how to get to Romania to our sister. But, unfortunately, we had to leave our grandmother and father. On March 5th, with the help of the Red Cross organization, we went to Odessa, and then we went on a bus. We heard several explosions and an air raid warning. We left the city immediately. We were passing through military posts, and some of them stopped us and gave us sweets. Our Ukrainian army, our real heroes. After we arrived in Odessa and spent one night in a friend's house, a volunteer took us to the border. We walked 2 kilometers and stood in line for several hours. The border was on the water, and we had to cross the river by ferry. It was cold, but we managed it. Then we got on the bus and went to the city of Dolce, where our sister met us. I've been here for 10 days, but I really want to go home. As of the 21st day of war, more than 105 children have been killed. More than 3,000 civilians have been killed, and an unaccountable amount of people have been injured. All this blood on the hands of Putin and his army is an eternal shame for them. We did not start it, but we will finish it. Thanks to Western countries for their help. It would be good if they closed the sky over Ukraine. And I hope this never happens again. Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava. This was from the 3rd, March 3rd.
I'd like to thank our drama students from Carnegie Mellon for those very strong readings, very strong diary entries from teenagers and their teachers who are in the Centropa Ukrainian network. We'll go quickly into the next section, which is we're going to look at photographs that were taken by Max Levin. Max Levin is one of the 2 photographers we use very often in Ukraine. And he's been working with us since 2016. I want to tip the hat to our team in Hamburg, Fabian Rula, Ninja Steyer, Max von Scholen, and Magda Farnese, because they're the ones who've been working with our teachers in Ukraine. I'm just going to show you some pictures that Max had taken of our seminars for teaching teachers, and then turning, and this is Fabian's idea, turning teenagers, the leaders of every class, into stakeholders so that they become guides for the Centropa Ukrainian exhibition. And then we see the reaction of students that Max wanted to show us, of students looking at our exhibition on Ukrainian Jewish history. And then we're going to see some pictures that Max took starting on the 24th of the month. So we'll take a look at this, and just give me a second to start. I'm sorry. Where did I do that? Well, no one has heard from Max Levin since the 13th of March. We've been supporting him and helping him financially. And I told him that I wanted to use some of his less grisly pictures with some of our teenage students in the United States. And Max wrote back and said, fine, just don't make me into a hero. So we won't do that as long as we hear from him soon, and we hope that will be very soon. Hope that he's been perhaps at best abducted and will be released. So that covers that part of our program. Is that right, Michal? And then we're open for questions.
Yeah, that's correct. And if you can bring me back to the main screen with Ed. Well, what we'll do now is, and thank you to all of our participants, and we're going to take questions. And I do see that there's some questions from the Q&A. So I will start with them, and they're directed. It's not clear who they're directed to, but in some cases I can figure that out. Okay, let me just wait for a second. Let me just ask if Kenny from Media Services, if you're able to bring me back to the main screen. Thank you. Okay, so we have lots of questions. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to start from the bottom. We have a question from Carrie Kina asking if it's possible to get the photo essay by Max Levin to show our students in the USA with appropriate accreditation, of course.
Carrie, just be sure to send me a direct message somehow, and I'll get you something on that.
Thank you, Ed. We have a, okay, so we have a question from Lori Weissman. Okay, thank you for this firsthand witness to what's going on in Ukraine. I'm wondering if you have contact with people in Russia as well. What is their perception of this invasion?
I can only speak for myself, and I would like Marta and Natalia to speak on that, because I'm sure they would be more apt. We are in touch with a few people. Actually, it's the grandchildren of some of the people we interviewed in Russia, and some of those interviewees are still alive at over the age of 100. And their granddaughters and grandson, we're in contact with them, but we don't discuss politics. So, but Natalia and Marta, you perhaps have something on that.
I'll give Marta the mic and maybe add a sentence. Marta?
Yes. So as I clearly understand their question, it's about the help of Holocaust survivors. Yes, or I'm sorry, I missed the question.
I'll repeat it, Marta. So thank you for your kind of witness to what's going on in Ukraine. I'm wondering if you have contact with people in Russia as well, and what is their perception of this invasion?
Oh,
yeah, that's why I wanted you to.
Oh, okay, okay. Thank you so much. We can talk about it a lot, and this is a very painful question for us. I will talk about my personal story because I think that it's very relevant to the what's going on. My husband has a Russian background. His father and his mother are Russian, and almost all of his relatives nowadays are staying in Russia, and nobody actually is checking on him. And after Lviv was shelled yesterday, they still kept silence. He was trying to talk with them and to find out what are they thinking about this invasion, about this cruelty, about the destroying of hospitals, maternity hospitals. Maybe you know that in Mariupol, many Ukrainian young women died with their newborn children. and also pregnant women that were sheltered in this theater. And some of them, some of his relatives just don't want to discuss this question. And some of them clearly support actually this invasion, and they don't believe in these the stories of cruelty. So they justify this aggression and this war. And our story, our personal story, is not only the one case. I hear similar stories from my friends and from my acquaintances and from my relatives. I'm also very disappointed with the position of some of Russian Holocaust scholars as well. They kept silent even today, even after destroying Chernihiv, Mariupol and other cities. And I am full of frustration. I am full of anger because of this silence. Because we as Holocaust historians know that silence in violence is complicity, could be a complicity. But at the same time, I want to stress that some of my colleagues, Russian colleagues, clearly support Ukraine. They organize different rallies in support of Ukraine in different cities and abroad. And I think that this is very brave position, and I am very grateful for their stance. But we should clearly understand that as Levada actually measure the public opinion in Russia, in current days, the support of this military operation is rising, despite of all casualties, despite of so many Ukrainian children that have been killed and wounded in Ukraine. So it's a very difficult story, a very complex story. And I think that we should, that this conversation between Ukrainians and Russians will be very difficult and painful. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. We have one more question each for our other two panelists, one of which is, Tim, this is for you, and then we have a question for you, Ruslan, and that somebody had written here that we don't know where, so the city where Maria lives has just been bombed. So I don't know who Maria actually is, but Tim, do you have any updates on bombing tonight?
Well, you might have been referring to Maria Avdieva, who I referred to earlier on. I mean, yeah, I can hear shelling. I mean, I don't know if it's, but it's not only incoming, it's outgoing as well. I can't tell you if it's incoming or outgoing. It's in the distance, and it's probably in the northeast of the city where most of it is, but it's not in the center of town.
Tim,
I can hear it quite clearly.
Before we ask us Ruslan, something about archives, Tim, there's one other thing. Are you actually seeing that the Ukrainian army, Kharkiv, for those of us who've been there, knows how incredibly close it is to the border to Russia, and everyone figured that it would fall almost instantly, and besides, most of the people who live in Kharkiv are actually Russian speaking, not Ukrainian speaking. But we're hearing correctly that that first of all, the Russians have not taken this enormous industrial city, and now is the Ukrainian army actually pushing them back?
Well, I mean, this whole thing about Russian speaking is this kind of like, very kind of out of date idea. I mean, people in Dublin, in Ireland, are English speaking, but it doesn't mean that they want to become part of England or rejoin the United Kingdom, obviously. You know, I mean, it's true that there was a sort of higher proportion of kind of pro-Russians here, but you know, most people were not. And in fact, in the early days of the war, the Russians did send a kind of lightly armed reconnaissance parties, basically sauntering into the center of Kharkiv, where I mean, I assume that they were the Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian army basically let them come quite deep into the city before hitting them and expelling them. So now they're on the sort of edges of the city, and you know, like in Kyiv, they haven't been able to take it because the Ukrainian army is, you know, has defended it and is defending the city. They say that they've taken back little pieces of little parts, of little bits of territory that the Russians had taken, but I mean, I can't actually tell you if that's true. I mean, I can't confirm that. I do know that I think in Kyiv that they have taken back a little bit of territory in the northeast, and I also think there's been some hype about it in other parts. They claimed last week that they had liberated the town of Makariv, so I tried to go there, and first of all I couldn't get in because it was too dangerous, and then the mayor said, well, it was never taken by the Russians anyway. They took a little bit of it, and they're still there. So there was a little bit of kind of patriotic hype about that. But you know, I mean, the main point is that the Russians have not been able to take Kharkiv, they haven't been able to take Kiev, and they haven't been able to take any big major urban center. You know, even including, you know, the Mariupol. I mean, Mariupol may well fall, but it hasn't yet.
All right. Tim, thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing you in happier circumstances very soon. Ruslan, we have a very interesting question for you from Deborah Yellen in regards to the status of Ukrainian historical archives. And she writes, have any of these institutions been deliberately targeted? And are there any ways that we can support archivists and librarians trying to protect their collections? And then she gave a link on that. And Ruslan, we've read stories, and same thing with places like Kharkiv, is that in the lead up to the 24th of February, most museums simply did not take things down from the wall, as opposed to spiriting it away earlier. Can you address that, Ruslan? I think my guess is that we've lost Ruslan. So Tim, it's back to you. About museums getting rid of spiriting things away, or archives. I know that the main building in Kharkiv, the main government building, didn't it get hit?
The main government building in Kharkiv, the main administration building in the center of town, it was indeed hit by a missile. Or I think maybe 2 missiles quite early on in the conflict, and quite a lot of people, at least 12, were killed because there were people in the building at the time. But I mean, even today, they're still clearing it out. But you know, it is symbolically, you know, not only is it a sort of, you know, an important building in its own right because it is the main administration building, but symbolically it is also very important. It is on one of the biggest squares in Europe, and at the end of that square is a building called Dezhprom, which is the famous. It looks like a kind of modern building, but in fact it's more than 100 years old. It's a 1920. No, it's just under 100 years old, but it's a 1920s collectivist building. You know, a famous building, and in the middle of the square now is the now abandoned skating rink, which was you know, happily being used just over a month ago when I was first here, or when I was last here.
Well, okay, then
Marta wants to add something.
Marta?
Just quick remark about archives. We experienced the huge loss of the archive. It was hit by a Russian rocket in Chernihiv. It's a former KGB archive, which contain mostly the KGB files about their, for example, war crimes tribunals against Nazis and their local collaborators. And they contain a lot of information about the Holocaust, actually, about Jewish lives, that they contain information about the repressions against Jews taken by Soviets, about everything, about how KGB actually was trying to interrupt this cooperation between Ukrainian Jewish intelligentsia in 1960 and 1917 in regard of commemoration of the Holocaust victims. It's a great loss for us, and I am sure that that we should take additional steps in order to preserve other archives from just save them. Yeah.
Can I add a sentence? I know we're running out of time, but there has been a lot of activities that I've seen in Warsaw from Polish historians and archivists organizing, big CD-ROMs, big memory stuff to be transferred to Lviv, in particular to the Central Historical Archives, and also requests for anti-fire blankets and stuff like this. So clearly Ukrainian historians and archivists are doing utmost preparing and as much trying to protect the treasures that are in those buildings.
Well, I want to thank you both, and I want to thank Tim. Please stay safe, Tim. And I want to thank Olivia and Lucas and Noah and the one I'm missing, and for the great readings that you guys did. And Michal, I'll turn it back over to you to sign off for us.
Thank you, Ed. Again, we're out of time, but thank you again, Marta, Natalia, Tim, Ruslan, Lucas, Noah, Tessa and Olivia for beautiful readings, and to Centropa for the incredible work you're doing. And
one more thing, if I may, this is the commercial break, is that should anyone feel the need to support a teacher, one of our Ukrainian teachers, go to centropa.org, our website. There's a link right at the top of the page, and you can make a donation. We're sending $60 a month. To every teacher. You make it 1 month, you can make it a half month, or you can make it 10 months, whatever you wish. And we 100% of this money goes to the teachers directly to their bank accounts through our colleague in near Rivne. So there's your commercial break.
So, okay, thank you, everyone. We're going to sign off.
Thanks, everybody. Okay.
Thank you for putting it together.